As I rise, Mr. Speaker, I have to turn to my friend on my right and ask if he's had that birthday party that you envisaged between 5 and 6. But it will appear not, because I didn't get an invitation. 5 and 7, sorry, 5 and 7. Yes, it will appear not. I didn't get an invitation. But Mr. Speaker, when I listened, and though I would want to focus on my ministries, I want to reflect on a few things that may have been said in this parliament, and in fact, even some things that have been said outside of this parliament. Because when I listen to some of the members of the opposition who represented the Labour Party in the parliament, I sort of wondered if they were having an epiphany, because I recall the events of the previous administration only as recently as when they were relegated to the opposition, that their conduct reflected one of corruption. And when I hear them use the word corruption in this parliament, I wondered whether they were having an epiphany. Because, Mr. Speaker, if I am to reflect on some of the things that this country faced when they were in government. For example, Mr. Speaker, we had 8 years of the development of a Beacon Heights. And in 8 years, Mr. Speaker, only 12 houses were built, 1.5 house per year. But when you look at the amount of money spent on Beacon Heights, caused to be spent on Beacon Heights, near $100 million, I had to reflect on why was this huge investment made at Beacon Heights, and to look at who would benefit from that investment. And Mr. Speaker, it might not surprise you to know that land in that particular area were owned by a former water engineer, Mr. Christmas. And so $100 million being spent in that area could only or would benefit landowners in that community. But at the time of the investment, Mr. Speaker, we know that Mr. Christmas was already in a forgetful stage. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Christmas had refused to be married.
Mr. Speaker, on a point of
And so, Mr. Speaker,
on a point of order.
Honourable Member, I'm listening closely to the Honourable Member for number 8. I really cannot.
Mr. Speaker, I'm writing a point of order. You have to even listen to me. You're listening to him, but you have to listen to me at least for one
Yes, but I cannot see where a point of order can come from anything he has just said. The point of order is disallowed. Continue on number 8.
and so, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Christmas owned land in that area. And we know, Mr. Speaker, that ultimately he became a married man very shortly before his demise. And Mr. Speaker, who do you think benefited from that particular investment? If you look at who benefited, you can only align that with corruption. Corruption, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, when they come to this parliament to speak about corruption, they must look in the mirror, because this government is not engaged in any corruption. They must look in the mirror and see who and what they see. Mr. Speaker, we know that for 26 months in this country, our country was held to hostage. Our country was hijacked. I have to use that language, Mr. Speaker, because you could only call it a hijack. Hijacked for 26 months by an illegal government. During that period, Mr. Speaker, of 26 months, we saw a government that paraded through this country, involved in all kinds of corrupt deals. Mr. Speaker, 26 months preventing a legitimate opposition that had declared to the Governor General and to the world that they are the majority in this parliament and ought to be the governing party, or the country must go to elections. What came out of that, Mr. Speaker? One of the things that came out of that, Mr. Speaker, was the fact that when the Honorable Leader of the Opposition moved the motion of no confidence, it would appear as the panic went through the government at the time. And because of that panic, Mr. Speaker, they refused, in fact, they aborted the presentation of the budget in December. And one would think, Mr. Speaker, that they will take note of the Constitution and its requirements, and that within the 60 days allotted up to the 1st of March, that they would have taken the opportunity to present their budget in accordance with the Constitution. But, Mr. Speaker, what happened? They allowed the time to expire, and when the time was expired, they took an opportunity in April, more than a month later, to bring a resolution to this parliament purporting to do something which the Constitution did not allow them to do. A clear violation of the Constitution. Because, Mr. Speaker, the section which they brought the resolution hoping to adopt the budget based on the fact that section 71 and 71.1 and 2, that the period had expired, that section, Mr. Speaker, if you look at it, is an entrenched part of the Constitution. And any amendment, any changes, any corrections to that entrenched portion of the Constitution can only be done by referendum. So to bring a resolution to the Parliament, purporting to allow them to bring a budget in April, was a clear violation of the Constitution. And, Mr. Speaker, I dare say that the Minister of Finance proceeded to spend money in 2013 that, had there been other persons who were interested in taking people to court, he could be taken to court for spending which was not properly authorized, because that resolution could not authorize him to bring a budget to Parliament to spend the country's money. What he ought to have done under the circumstances, since the time had run out, was to call an election. That's what he ought to have done, to have called an election so that we go back to the polls and determine a new government. And if perchance, Mr. Speaker, he had returned to government, he could then bring a new budget, or the incoming government of Team Unity would have brought the budget. But they trampled on the Constitution. And I sometimes wonder if my colleague from number 3, as a young politician coming in, has not really asked the question, why did you do that and not call an election? Trampled on the Constitution and then spent money in 2013 that was not properly authorized, because they cannot be properly authorized if the resolution was not worth the paper on which it was written, because that resolution could only have come into being if there was a referendum, because it is an entrenched provision in the Constitution. And that is how they conducted government, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I don't know if we are aware of section 26(5) of the Constitution, because despite, Mr. Speaker, despite the fact that we have indicated to the leader of the opposition, to the member from number 6, that anyone with loyalty to a foreign country, anyone under his own acknowledgement of allegiance, obedience, or adherence to a foreign power or state, ought not to be sitting in the parliament. And let me read section 26.5 for you, Mr. Speaker, because you see, I want him, the member for number 6, to know, and the country to know, that what occurred in parliament, and we're not going to push him out. No. We were not going to do that. Member for number 3 come out and plug out anybody's phone, anybody's mic. We were not going to be so bold as to say we're going to plug out anybody's mic. And so, we were not going to tell the honorable member for number 6 not to do what he normally does, which is to violate the Constitution.
Honorable member.
Yes.
Honorable member for number 3.
Should be sitting.
It's not proper for you to be on your feet for such a length of time while there's another member presenting.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
I have no difficulty with you consulting, but being upright, it just, it's not proper. Continue.
So let me read section 26.5, Mr. Speaker. Because section 26.5 of the Constitution says, any person who sits or votes in the National Assembly, knowing or having reasonable grounds for knowing that he is not entitled to do so, shall be guilty of a criminal offense. Do you understand that, Mr. Speaker? Any member who sits or votes, having reasonable grounds for knowing he should not be here, shall be guilty of a criminal offense. So when the member for number 6 comes in here, knowing that he holds dual citizenship, knowing that he has loyalty to another country, that member is clearly in violation of the Constitution and can be guilty of a criminal offense. It is not unusual, Mr. Speaker.
The member who's on the street and is making a presentation is accusing the member from number 6 who sits on this side of having dual citizenship. The member ought to provide incontrovertible evidence of that if he's going to admit that in this parliament, in particular in relation to a member who's sitting in this chamber.
I apologize, honorable member, but I am of the view that the accusation is being laid at the member for number 6, and if he was here, he would have been the best person to refute or challenge.
It's about what is admissible in the House. It's not about who is present or not.
I would prefer the honorable for number 6 to respond to anything relating to that matter.
It's about what is admissible in the House, Mr. Speaker. It's about what's proper or improper. It's not about who. It's not about who.
The honorable member has had his time.
It's not about
This is my time.
You always the people.
And the honorable member will not waste my time. So the honorable member must know that when they come to refer to this government as being corrupt, they must consider their own conduct. Look in the mirror. Consider their own conduct when in government. Because it can only be corruption if the honorable member has a house in Bird Rock.
Yes.
It can only be corruption if the member has a house in Bird Rock, which the government is paying $2,500 for. A house which was built under special circumstances, got duty-free for first-time homeowners. First-time homeowners are expected to live in their own house.
Yes.
That's what first-time homeowners are expected to do.
That was your policy.
You can't build a house as a first-time homeowner, rent it out, and then turn around and say that you're a first-time homeowner, you took advantage of anything. You didn't take advantage of anything. What he did was corrupt.
And
Mr. Speaker, point of order. This is now in relation to me, I presume, so I can speak, Mr. Speaker, because
It's, you presume it's in relation to you. I cannot say I have distinctly heard the member refer to you as a member.
Mr. Speaker, at some point we're going to have to get serious in this House and be able to allow members on this side
Mr. Speaker.
to be able to raise objections
I
on
made no
matters.
reference whatsoever, Mr. Speaker, to the honourable member.
Mr. Speaker.
But the honourable member obviously has put
Could I
on
make
a
my
cap
point
which
of
fits
order?
him.
Anyway, I have
The cap fit him.
could I make-
He's wearing it.
unless I am satisfied.
The only member I referred to this
Order.
morning was the honourable member for number 3.
Order.
Number 6.
Unless I'm satisfied that whatever allegation is being made is directed specifically to a member, I will not allow what you're attempting to do, honourable member.
That is what the member was saying. Was saying the member.
Good.
Not here.
Right?
Continue.
Mr. Speaker. Mr.
I
Speaker.
have moved.
The
Mr.
member
Speaker.
opposite made an allegation of corruption against myself.
The member.
And I'm asking you to admit me to clear the record in relation to that.
Honourable member, my ruling is unless I am satisfied that such allegation was directed to a specific
So are you saying
member.
Are you saying that you're not clear about whom the member was referring?
That's my ruling. Continue, honourable member.
Let me be clear.
Jesus, peace.
Let me be clear. Any member in this house who builds a home under special circumstances, who gets duty free to build a home, a first-time homeowner, any member in this parliament who does that, and if any member of the opposition is guilty, they are guilty of corruption. They are corrupt because they turn around and make the government pay for it. $2,500 US paid for the former commissioner of police to pay the mortgage on the house. If that is not corruption, nothing else is. And any member in this house who is guilty of that, who has done that, is guilty of corruption. So when they come in here talking about corruption, look in the mirror. There's no corruption on this side. None whatsoever. Let them look in the mirror, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, we know that the honourable members on the opposition benches were once in government. And we know, Mr. Speaker, that they were guilty of taking the country to the IMF the first time in the history of this country.
Yes.
Run to the IMF with cap in hand begging.
Bankrupt the country.
Bankrupt the country, poof away the land. We know that. And I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, during that period, during that period of bankrupting the country, plenty people lose money, Social Security, which they caused to spend $100 million at Beacon Heights to carry up the price of land for people to benefit. For wives or sisters or people in here to benefit. To benefit because they married someone in their old age, when they soon die. That kind of thing is corruption. That same institution, the Social Security, had to take a haircut.
Yes.
$33 million of poor people money. Poor people's hard-earned pension money
Yes.
was poofed away with a haircut because of the conduct of this government. Debt created for doing very little, or maybe not even anything. Debt caused that haircut, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, Social Security is not the only one that took a haircut,
I'll be to you and all of that.
I mean, there are a number of institutions, but I want to focus on National Bank. Poor National Bank,
Yeah.
again, poor people money, had to take a serious haircut because of that debt situation. So when they come in Parliament, Mr. Speaker, and speaking about corruption, tell them this honourable member who was elected to be here, say, look in the mirror, and the mirror will tell you who are the corrupt people. Mr. Speaker, what else happened under them that points to corruption? Talking about a team unity government that's 2.5 years in office, not looking in the mirror. What else happened? We know, Mr. Speaker, at an election night, the supervisor of elections abandoned his report to the country, which is his constitutional remit, his statutory remit. You think, Mr. Speaker, he did that on his own? You think any supervisor of elections can do that on his own? That goes to the feet of the government that was in power. That is corruption. As a matter of fact, I don't even know why up to now, Mr. Attorney General, you're here, you better come in, because I think the country wants us to do something about that. You see? And you're almost kind of sorry for the guy to take instructions to be able to suspend reports on the elections, violate his oath which he took as the supervisor of elections. That happened under the previous administration, Mr. Speaker. But you know what has happened under the government, Mr. Speaker? I'll go back to the same constitution, because that government came to office, to Parliament, to pass, Mr. Speaker, an increase in members bill. Senators increase in members bill. And despite the fact, which I must say, Mr. Speaker, the court has struck down. The court has struck it down as unconstitutional.
Null and void.
Null and void.
Of no effect.
So, Mr. Speaker, that bill was brought here to this Parliament by the previous administration. Yes, Mr. Speaker, brought by the previous administration. And what it purported to do was to bring a man to vote to say aye. The only thing he said in the Parliament that there was aye. Yes, voting to support a corrupt government. And Mr. Speaker, I remember standing to my feet when I was on the opposition benches. And I said to the honorable member, the very same section 26.5, I said to him, if you sit or vote in this Parliament having reasonable grounds to know that you're not supposed to, you're guilty of a criminal offense. So it is not unusual for them to continue violating the Constitution, doing things which can be criminal in order to pursue their own selfish agenda. And so, Mr. Speaker, I mean, I can go on and on about their conduct.
Going good.
I can go on and on about their conduct. But, Mr. Speaker, I want to speak to my ministries. You know, because if I continue down that road, I might be like my member from number 5. Use up all my time speaking about their ill-gotten gains. I mean, one of them said, in fact, let me look for this quote here. The Minister of Public Infrastructure, he was saying something about elections in 2021. He was speaking tongue-in-cheek. He knew it was 2020 is the latest. But he said something about 2021. What was the response of a member from the opposition? This is what he said. You better take what you could get now. That is the attitude, you know.
That's what government is about.
That is what government is about for them, you know. Take what you could get now. In other words, when they come to government, they see themselves as coming to take something, what they could get. An honorable member who served in the previous administration sat there. I'm sure you heard him, Mr. Speaker. It was the senator himself. You better take what you could get now. Which means the way they see government is to walk in, waltz in, open your pocket and full it up.
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order. Member just referred to the senator on this side. There is one such person. Very clear that he's referring to myself. The member is alleging that I said that people in that government should take what they could get from the government, and that is the modus operandi or the mindset of people on this side. The comment which was made was in relation to an extension of the term to 2021. And I said to the member from number 7 that he should take as much time in government as he should get in this term, because it is one term that he's going to get. That was the comment I made.
Let me ask you a question, Honorable Senator. Did you or did you not use the words, you better take what you get now?
Mr. Speaker,
yes, yes,
I spoke in a context
but did
of
you,
a comment that was made on that side.
Honorable Member, we're not going to prolong it.
We're not going to prolong it because we're not going to prolong it.
Let me say, I heard you use the term, you better take what you could get now.
In what
I
context?
heard you.
In what context, Mr. Speaker?
Okay?
Yes.
And isn't he imputing improper motive?
If the honorable member wants to constructing his own mind the meaning of that. This is a debate. But you did use the words. Continue, honorable member.
When are we going to Jesus, please?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honorable member must not have words matter. The honorable member must not have words matter.
And if he wanted to be clear, he ought to have said what he's trying to say now. But he never said that at all. You better take what you could get now. Was referring to the fact that the honorable minister was making a presentation and spoke about the term that take what you could get now. That is my interpretation of it. My interpretation is that the honorable member was saying take what you could get now. It is an attitude in the opposition members, an attitude which says take what you could get now. And that is what was happening. You were taking what you could get.
That's honorable member for number 8.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker.
Again, it's a simple matter. Honorable Senator used the word.
Yes.
You have given your interpretation
Yes.
of it. I gave him an opportunity to say what he meant. We now have heard both sides. We move on.
You said it. Yeah, I said what I meant.
So you have gotten the opportunity to say what you meant, and the honorable member is giving his opinion on what he thinks he meant. So it's now a closed matter, and we move on.
It's not a reasonable interpretation of what people said.
Continue, honorable member.
It's what he thinks or what he wants to say.
Mr. Speaker, it is clear that the honorable members on the opposition benches like to speak words, like to say things. And this is why I'm telling them, look in the mirror. Because when they say things, they are saying things as if they are going through an epiphany. That's what it seemed like to me. A complete turnaround from what they used to be, which I know they still are. So I don't understand why he will be jumped in. You can't say something in Parliament and then turn around and want other people to believe he didn't say it. I'm glad you admitted that you said it. I'm glad he admitted that he said it. Because it means, Mr. Speaker, that I'm not speaking out of turn. And Mr. Speaker, look, I could spend all morning going through a lot of these things which they have done in the past, but I want to focus on my ministries. Because my constituents deserve that. Indeed, the country deserves that. Indeed, the people with whom I work deserve to hear how the ministry views the performance of the ministries while they are working as technicians and otherwise. And so, Mr. Speaker, under the Ministry of Agriculture, Universal Health Insurance, Marine Resources, Cooperatives, Environment and Human Settlement, we have seen a number of changes and development taking place. Development has taken place in all of the various departments. Many of these changes, Mr. Speaker, reflect the vision of the Team Unity government, which was laid out in the manifesto leading up to the 2015 general elections. And the people looked at that manifesto, Mr. Speaker, and gave us the mandate to go and deliver what we said we would deliver. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, in my ministries, I am focusing on delivering those things which my government, which my Team Unity now in government, indicated to the country that we would do if given the opportunity. We want to do so, Mr. Speaker, because certainly we will serve this term throughout, and we will be here for another term and another term. And despite the fact that there are members on the opposition benches who will be talking about some Dr. Drew can take my seat, I tell you, Mr. Speaker, the Dr. Drew better run in St. Paul's. Because, Mr. Speaker, I am here and I will be here again when the government returns, as long as I'm in good health. As long as I'm in good health, by the grace of God, I'll be here. You see, it's not the first time, I was campaigning in 2015, Mr. Speaker.
You started to see already?
And Mr. Speaker, the honorable member, the senator on the opposition benches met me in my constituency in St. Peter's. And he said, you're going to lose. That's 2015. So it's not the first time I'm hearing that from them. And I came out stronger than ever.
Who was your opponent?
And the same Dr. Joe was my opponent.
Now you're showing you how weak you are.
Stronger than ever. Because, Mr. Speaker, in 2010, I had only won by 31. And in 2015, I won by 236. Stronger than ever. And they must understand that. I understand my constituency and I will be here again. You don't have to worry about nobody they call Dr. Drew.
You're getting scared from what you're saying, man.
The great master, Mr. Speaker. Nobody said that?
Nobody can bring up that, so it's amazing you brought
The leader of the opposition brought it up.
You're running scared, yeah, but
The leader of the opposition was here and he was speaking.
you're running scared. I would be concerned because your members are telling you that. Your supporters are declaring publicly.
So, Mr. Speaker,
That's what they say.
the great master said that he did not come to be served, but to serve. And the Team Unity Administration is doing just that. We came to office and we said that we are a servant, we are providing servant leadership. And it is servant leadership that we set out to provide. So, Mr. Speaker, in the Department of Agriculture, we have made considerable strides in implementing and executing the activities outlined in the 2013-2016 Strategy and Action Plan. And of course, Mr. Speaker, we have already built a new action plan, Strategy and Action Plan 2017 to 2021. As a result of the performance of putting things to work in accordance with the plan, the output in the agricultural sector, despite its challenges, saw significant improvement this year. Significant improvement in a number of areas. And so, Mr. Speaker, we have seen, for example, that there was appreciable gain in the production of food. For example, at this time last year, Mr. Speaker, we recorded 799.05 metric tons of food. And at this time, we are now at 978.88 metric tons of food. This, of course, Mr. Speaker, is a realization of an increase of 179.833 metric tons. Or, if we put it in percentage terms, something like 22.51%. And Mr. Speaker, we are grateful for the rain because the rain has had an impact on it as well. As you know, 2015 we went through a really serious drought period. And added to that we had, and we still have, the monkeys, Paradia larceny. We have all of these that are still causing havoc to our farmers. Now, Mr. Speaker, there are some other areas as well worthy of highlighting that have seen increase. For example, Mr. Speaker, in the crop subsector, we have seen an increase in onions and pineapples. They recorded, I will consider, notable increases. These two crops had seen some decline. Again, I go back to the fact that we had drought in 2015, and we had monkeys, we had the people, already last night we had roving animals like pigs and all those creating havoc. So those two crops, Mr. Speaker, saw some increases. Onions, for example, increased by 48.21% from some 28 metric tons to 41.5 metric tons. And in pineapples, Mr. Speaker, we have seen an increase from 2.3 metric tons to 8 metric tons. This, of course, is an increase of about over 200%. Other growth, Mr. Speaker, came from watermelons. We saw an increase in watermelons. It was, at this time last year, 114.3 metric tons. To date, we have recorded up to 225.3 metric tons. So that there is increases, we have increases in a number of crops that are being consumed by the people of St. Kitts and Nevis. We had increases in a significant number of crops. Yes, there are one or two that have been affected, because I, Mr. Speaker, I must tell you, I'm not particularly satisfied with the outcome of the cabbages. And that, of course, I could go into why that is that decrease, but that is an area that we have to look at in the future. We have to look at the cabbages to make sure that they increase. Now, in the area, Mr. Speaker, of animal husbandry, there have been a continuation of some trends and increases in some of the trends. One of the challenges, Mr. Speaker, well, let me don't put it as a challenge. One of the things we have noted is that the taste for beef has not really changed. Somehow beef is not a meat of choice, it appears. compared to, say, pork and mutton. And so we have seen that because of this low preference for beef, the output, and when I say output, the output fell from 43.2 metric tons to 33. But let me add, Mr. Speaker, because this is not to say that there's not a lot of beef cattle around. There are. If you go down to the farm near Old Road, you would find that it is, strewn with all kinds of, solid heifers and bulls down there. The challenge, however, is the taste for beef is not really growing in St. Kitts and Nevis. And I don't know if what we can do to change that, but I believe my ministry has to now work on whether we can get some of this beef to be exported to our neighboring islands, whether we can find a way to get it channeled down to the Windward Islands, because I know that there are countries in the Windward Islands that have been asking about beef. However, Mr. Speaker, while beef has shown slight decrease, only in the production output, mutton and pork fared better, even though it's only slightly. There was an increase in goat meat from 3.84 metric tons to 4.39 metric tons. And we, Mr. Speaker, we are hoping to introduce into the flock, into the stock, a pure breed Syries, which we hope to get from the United States of America. And in getting that pure breed Syries, we have engaged the Ross University as a partner so that we can bring in that breed, which will do a couple of things. It will, you see, we have this small ruminant stock that have been losing not growing in weight fast enough. And so that pure breed Syries, when it gets here, should be able to help our small ruminants to grow faster and produce a dress weight faster in about 6 months. This, of course, if successful, will provide us with more beef, more mutton at a faster rate. Mr. Speaker, we tried it last year, and that was one of the disappointments, I must tell you, which affected us, not only St. Kitts, but other areas in the region, and this is why I'm mentioning it, because there was an attempt to do artificial insemination. It turned out that the samples apparently were dead. That is an unfortunate situation because after putting much time and effort in it, because the samples were dead, we were not able to successfully carry out that exercise. And this didn't happen here alone. It was a project being done across the region, so every one of the islands that had that done did not succeed in that particular mission. But I will say, though, Mr. Speaker, that we've had some success in broiler meat. And this is where I believe that there's great opportunity. And I also want to take the opportunity now to encourage persons and thank people like Mr. Webster, who has set out on his own to get involved. We have had some success in that broiler meat production, in last year, 2016, we were only able to produce something like 1.8 metric tons, but already for this year, we have gone to 9.84 metric tons. And Mr. Speaker, this is significant because we do import quite a lot of chicken. And while it is true that we do not produce the chicken in the various parts as some countries which export to here, we do produce these chickens. Broiler meat is produced, and we're up to 9.84 metric tons. I'm telling the young people, I'm telling any person interested in getting involved in business, it is an opportunity. You only have to look at the number, the quantity of chicken parts that are imported, and then you will see that there is great opportunity for us to get into broiler meat production. Now, I would like to encourage, as I said, young people in particular, to get involved in it. Now, Mr. Speaker, To provide greater direction and relevant interventions by the Department of Agriculture, we have prepared our 2017 to 2021 Strategy and Action Plan, with the help, of course, of a team from Trinidad and Tobago, our extension officers, our consultants, researchers and planners, farmers as well, and indeed other stakeholders got together, and that 2017-2021 strategic and action plan has been prepared, and we are now following it as a guide to take us into 2021. Mr. Speaker, let me outline some essential sections, some essential movement forward that we are going to follow, some essential directions that we are going to follow. For example, we have determined in that strategic and action plan that one of the things that we have to pay attention to is the reduction of crop and livestock losses. Now, it might seem like an ordinary statement, just a statement, but then just think about it. We've had livestock losses because we have things like people with their dogs that are causing havoc among certain flocks in the rural areas. It is a matter which we have to address frontally, because we cannot have one. While it is, it is good to have dogs, we cannot have the small ruminants being destroyed by the conduct of people with their stray dogs. Stray dogs causing havoc on small ruminants. So it is something that we have to pay attention to, so that we do not lose the stock that we have. Number 2, Mr. Speaker, adopt and develop profitable measures to adapt and mitigate against climate change. That climate change word, almost in every sphere these days we're talking about it, despite what's happening now in the United States of America and the position of the US because of the new president. Climate change, I have come to believe, has a real impact on a number of things, including not only our environment, but including our own, to be able to have food security, we need to pay attention to what's happening with climate change. In fact, Mr. Speaker, we went as far as to begin to discuss the prospects of finding climate change resistant crops to substitute for what we're doing now. Because if we are, this year, we had 2 serious hurricanes that rooted up our crops. And so we have to find ways to be able to produce and store. In fact, Mr. Speaker, when I was in Costa Rica only a few months ago, it was one of the questions I raised with AICA. Is there the technology out there that can help us to store what we produce for periods of 2 or 3 years? I think I understand that it is in Argentina or Chile. And so we'll be looking at that concept, because I have learned a long time ago. I grew up in a Christian family, and I still maintain my own Christian values, and I hope that I can keep it that way and get to the heavenly place when the time comes. And so I know, Mr. Speaker, that when Pharaoh learned what was happening, or what was to happen in the land, when he got his dream interpreted, he learned from that guy who was in jail. And we know the whole story. Let's not go to the whole story. He understood that there will be 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. And what did he do, Mr. Speaker? He built more barns. He created more storehouses. So we have to find a way that when we have bumper crops, when we have production in abundance, that we find a way to be able to store. Because we are all working towards those sustainable goals. And so if we have to add one more ledge, one more limb to the whole picture, which is how do we store goods, food, so that no one can be hungry. No one at all can be hungry by 2030. We have determined, Mr. Speaker, that we have to do something about water, because water to the farmers is always a challenge. And while it is true that we have built dams, we have done this, most of the development of water in the Federation is really focusing on human settlement, not on farming so much. So while we are engaging in bilaterals with member countries, other friendly countries about water, having water available so that farmers can benefit, we as a nation have to pay greater attention to how we deal with water for agricultural purposes, because food security is important. If we don't have food, all the houses we have don't make sense if we can't feed ourselves. We have to try to feed ourselves. We have a country with perhaps the most arable land in the region. Well, Dominica is there. And so we must be able to feed ourselves. Mr. Speaker, another limb is enhancing national food security with emphasis on food safety. And here again, Mr. Speaker, we, with the help of the Taiwanese, have a lab and invested in a lab that is at Needmos. You know what that helps us to do, Mr. Speaker? It helps us to test the quality of the soil in which we are planting, to ensure that there is not an over-medicating of the land in which we grow our food. Because once you do that pesticide soil test, you know, well, you can't put more of certain pesticides in that soil if you want to produce food of a certain quality. So we're doing that soil testing, and you're also doing the testing on the food when they're produced. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, it has shown us that we are producing a 98-99% good quality product. So the people who use our local food can feel assured that the food they put in their stomach produced in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis is of the best quality. And I want to assure those in the hotel industry who have hitherto had a fear of buying food locally because of whatever the fear was. I want to assure them that our lab is conducting the kind of tests to determine quality, and the quality of our produce, the quality of our food can be used anywhere in the world. We are of the best quality. And so I want to advise the Marriotts and the others, I know we're getting the support of Hyatt already, that here in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis, you can be assured that the quality of food that we produce, because of the methods that we're using to test and to determine how much more you can invest or medicate the soil that we're using, that we are producing food of the best quality, and you should have no fear. Buy local food. So to the local farmers, in fact, let me speak to the hoteliers, to those in hotels and restaurants who were encouraging to use breadfruit in a certain way, and yam in a certain way, and pumpkins in a certain way, to promote these local foods, I am encouraging you to buy locally rather than to just hang on to importing food in the Federation, which we are producing here of the highest quality. So, Mr. Speaker, one of the other limbs is to create an environment for agribusiness to be more productive and profitable via capacity building. And I mention agribusiness because this is an area, again, Mr. Speaker, and I don't know, Mr. Speaker, if I have to tell my honorable friend from number 5 whether we need to include more entrepreneurial courses in the curriculum, because we import a lot of things in the country. Go in the supermarket, chips, all kind of drinks, some name mango, some name all kind of, I never see so much things we produce from neighboring countries. And the very same things we grow here can produce the same chips, the same drink. In fact, Mr. Speaker, local persons began to produce what we call, let me say agro-processing stuff. In other words, taking the main product and turning it into another refined product that can be consumed. We have people like the lady down in Boyd's who has been in farming all her life. I went to see her business. And to see these people take yam and potato and turn it into chips and have it nicely packaged and look just like the one you import on the shelf. In fact, go to the supermarket. Some of the supermarkets have some of them. It is amazing. In fact, she has a son. Her name is Miss Nisbet, Carlson Nisbet, and Adina Nisbet. She has a son. That's all he has done since he left school. Producing this stuff, producing drink, producing. That's all he's left. And he's doing well for himself. I'm saying to young people, there are opportunities. We just have to look for them, because the import shows, or import bill is so high, it shows that we keep importing all of these things from neighboring countries when we can produce them here. I want to see the day, Mr. Speaker. That is why at the consultation, which we had at OTI, I mentioned this point, and I mention it here again. It is time that our private sector, it is time that cooperatives of young people and otherwise get together. If, for example, you have a small cooperative, and I will come to cooperatives. Small cooperatives can get funding from Jeff, up to $50,000 US grant to get started, to get to work, to put to invest in any business they're doing. And so, if you can come together as young people, if the business sector, the private sector, can engage farmers in a different way, I assure you, Mr. Speaker, that it will be better for us, because what we want to get in the country is productivity. If you want to raise the level of productivity, you have to get married. You have to get this cooperation between private sector, entrepreneurs, and people like the farmers. And this is one way it can be done. Because if a private sector partner or a cooperative can say, look, Farmer A, if you plant 5 acres of just a certain type of bananas, I will buy all from you. If I'm a farmer and I don't have to worry about the marketing and the everything else, and I can just plant bananas and make a living and drive the same BMW like the guys in the other government who were corrupt. If I am a farmer and can find success that way, because all my goods can be sold to one person, and that person will take those bananas and turn those bananas into tons of banana chips, which can be marketed here and abroad. I think that we can revolutionize the way that agriculture is in St. Kitts. I think that we can revolutionize productivity levels, because, you know, all the song and dance that some people have, we have to work towards raising the level of productivity. It's okay for people to go cut the grass on the side of the road. Nothing's wrong with that in principle, but productivity. It is productivity that will drive economic activity, that will drive this economy. We have to produce. And so when we raise the productivity level, creating new things, and adding to the food security of the country, it will be better for those who are the farmers and those who are also doing the marketing. There's a young man who is here, Mr. Speaker. When you walk across Rosemary Lane, I think where Richard Keynes' business is, you see him on the corner there with a cart, and Princess Street, I'm sorry. I don't know my Bastia. Remember, I'm from Keon, right? Princess Street. And indeed, you see that business there. That's a guy who came from the Windward Islands. Came here. That's why I'm talking about people seeing business opportunities, local people. And he started that business. And you know what? What is good about what he's done, Mr. Speaker? He went and he sought himself about 15 acres of land to plant things, just to produce. In other words, rather than buy things that come from abroad to do that, he's producing it so it can be done right there. That is what is good about what he's doing. So he has this farm and this passion for farming, and he's turned that into, I would say, it's a gold mine. Local people can do the same thing. And so I encourage him. He's a CARICOM brother, he's an OECS brother. I encourage him, and I encourage local people to take example from him. Because if tomorrow 5 people who are 20, 21 band together and form, say, a cooperative, and can, because of their working with Jeff, they can secure, say, $50,000. You know, it is an opportunity for them to start something, your own enterprise. And then you look at what the raw material that the enterprise needs, and if it involves things like production, like food production, then get involved in some agricultural production to be able to feed that enterprise. Get involved in the agribusiness. Mr. Speaker, on the other hand, we have engaged AICA, and we have also engaged CADI. As you know, Mr. Speaker, CADI is one of those institutions that have revolutionized for about 44 years the way things are done in agriculture, in that they have brought the science to what we do. They have spread the information, trained and developed persons, ordinary farmers, to understand the science behind what they do. And so for that I want to thank CADI. And of course, CADI and AICA have been engaged. But we engaged AICA in a special way only recently, and this is important for you who are farmers. And here again I want to thank our local skilled personnel as well. I should mention her name, because there's a young lady who works with IT. And she partnered with AICA and with the fact that the government's portal is in place, and created an opportunity for all farmers and for the Department of Agriculture to be able to market what they have, even from their living room. Even from the living room. And so, Mr. Speaker, you can now go on the government portal. You can go to www.agrofresh.kn, for example. Or you can go to agrostore.gov.kn. Those two sites. What happens when you go to that site, Mr. Speaker? On the last one, the agrostore.gov.kn, the Agricultural Department has several items that they are marketing, that you can go there and see what they have, what is available, how you can access it. And then, of course, at www.agrofresh.kn, the farmers now can go and build a store. So that from your living room, farmers, you can stay there and you can upload all of the information. If you have potatoes, you could put it in there at what price, so that the guy over at Hyatt can then go online too and see what you have to sell and can purchase it from you. It is an opportunity, Mr. Speaker, for those persons who live in Sandy Point, who may not know that over in Keon people have plenty white potatoes, can go online and see the information and see what price, and to be able to make a purchase even online. It is an opportunity for someone in a neighboring island, like St. Martin and Anguilla, to find the information about any food, any product, white potatoes, pumpkins, what have you, that he might want to purchase. That, Mr. Speaker, is a revolutionizing of the information. And so I want to thank for that in particular, not only AICA, but a lady by the name of Miss Blanchard, who works at IT, because from day one, she came to me with that idea. And it sounded good. I'm not that way technically inclined, but it sounded good. And I'm pleased, Mr. Speaker, that it has been done, that every farmer in the country can go online and build a store. You can have your own business there online to be able to market any product that you produce, anything that you have in abundance. You can put the price, how you can get it and all that. And anyone, anywhere around the world can go online and see. Again, let me repeat, www.agrofresh.kn, and for the Department of Agriculture itself, agrostore.gov.kn. Yes, Mr. Speaker, we are also pleased that Hyatt has come on stream. Because while other hotels do purchase from some local people, I think Hyatt has demonstrated what I would like to see every hotel do. It demonstrated that they really want to partner with local people. Sent their technical people, their butler, their persons who are in the kitchen, sent them to meet with the agricultural department, meet with the farmers, went out in the field, visited some of the farmers where you have the people who are selling pigs, advised them how to do certain things to be able to get the quality that you want. And they have set about, and at the point of signing an MOU, to be able to purchase what they have as much as possible locally. And I want to thank Hyatt for that. And I hope that this management team of Hyatt and the future management team continue to support the local people, the local farmers with what they are producing. My government, Mr. Speaker, is also we're mindful of the plight of the farmers who were impacted by the hurricanes Irma and Hurricane Maria. And because of that impact, we have worked earnestly to provide the necessary support and relief. We have worked to provide relief to the farmers in an effort to bring back some sense of normalcy. We know that the farmers are dependent on this sector for their daily living. And so my government, after the hurricane, my ministry sought $300,000 immediately to assist farmers whose business were damaged and significantly impacted by the passage of the hurricanes. To date, Mr. Speaker, I'm aware that the Ministry of Finance has already disbursed something like $184,012 to be able to support something like 102 crop farmers and 33 livestock farmers. The level of relief given is based entirely on the extent of one's damages. Of the 102 crop farmers who qualified for hurricane relief assistance, 57 have already collected all or some of the material and services that they can access, while 22 of the 33 livestock farmers have done the same thing, so that there are some who have not yet accessed what is available to them. Mr. Speaker, what I'm aware of is that the assistance, of course, includes they're selecting from a range of services. Sales of items offered by the department, they have been able to access. We have purchased building materials, lumber and galvanized from hardware stores to distribute to livestock farmers who sustained damage to their roof and their pens. Some of those farms were rendered somewhat useless, and so we have supported them. Other forms of assistance given to farmers in the form of land preparation services, seeds, chemicals, plastic mulch, and fencing wire. Of course, there are always farmers who would like to get feed, and we've given them support in that area. Dewormer, fencing wire, Batical, and polyblue pipes. Those have been given to farmers, and as I said, some have received and some have not yet accessed the support from the department. The allocation of funds thus far, Mr. Speaker, we went ahead and we did some work to restore the roads. One of the challenges we had was where trees were across the roads. Some of the roads were severely eroded, and farmers had some farmers had difficulty getting to their land. And so we set about immediately, and we did not wait on the government's unit just to do the roads. We actually went and hired some private persons to be able to assist us to get those roads passable again so that the farmers can get to their farms. And we spent $34,000 doing that, so that every farmer, and if there's any farmer out there who is still having difficulty getting to their farm, because of that, I'd like to know about it, because we've set about to make sure that all of the farmers can access their farms. Of course, we've spent over $75,000 at the hardware again, supporting farmers, and from the Department of Agriculture itself, something like $74,600. We have spent, as I said, we have already disbursed something like $184,012.88, assisting farmers who got damaged from the hurricane. Mr. Speaker, I wish now to turn to the policy and planning unit, because we have a unit of policy and planning which supports what we're doing in agriculture. The unit has initiated a farm registration process in 2008. And perhaps I should indicate here that there are some farmers who resist registering. And I want to assure them that if they're not a registered farmer, it makes no sense in any hurricane for you to make an attempt to get support from the government, because it means you're not part of the overall network and work of the government or what the country wants. We want you to be registered because we want to know, we want to be able to know exactly what we're producing in what quantities. It is important not only for our own security, food security, but it is important for the data to be collated for other reasons, including the work that is done by the IMF when they come here. We need to know what our productivity levels are. And so you must register. And so they initiated this farm registration in 2008 and continues to maintain that database, all of the demographics, age and so on of the people who are involved in farming. In the 9th and 10th editions of the Agriculture's Fisheries Digest were produced by the same department. The digest, of course, represents macro and microeconomic data, as well as data on crops, livestock, and the fisheries sectors. So the unit continues to give support, especially in the collating of data. That is important for us to make decisions. Data drives decisions, Mr. Speaker. Because if you're making decisions without data, then you don't know what result you're going to get. You have to know the data, collate it, understand it, and then use the data to make decisions. Improving crop planning is better, and with the aim of some self-sufficient support from the farmers, we are here to deliver from that unit the information that is important for decision making. Now, Mr. Speaker, the Policy and Planning Unit continues to be an important link in the relation of the South-South partners for support of the agricultural sector. The unit is involved in developing projects with Colombia with regard to monkeys. One of the projects that was undertaken was an engagement with the Colombian to be able to map, to be able to do some work on what really is the population of the monkeys here in St. Kitts and Nevis. And significant work was done because we know that the monkeys are, well, to us in farming is a pest. But for those in biomedical research, it is a great resource. And then, of course, for those in tourism, at least some people seem to be self-sufficient from just putting a monkey on their shoulder and going downtown. So, while on the one hand, the farmer might say, get rid of all of them, we also have to look at what other benefits there are. And so, yes, we would like to reduce the significant numbers of monkeys in the country. We're not trying to wipe them all out. And I trust that the animal rights people who are listening are not upset by the fact that I say we have to reduce the population and get rid of some of them. Of course, Mr. Speaker, I did speak to agro-processing before, and I will touch it here again. I am again encouraging young people to get involved in the agro-processing work, because even though we have individuals who are engaged in it, the government of the day sought to get support from the Taiwanese to set up a unit at Needmus. That unit, Mr. Speaker, has shown that a business model can be created that can make an individual who is properly structured financially independent. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I'm aware that the department, that unit, is already producing at an average of about 40,000 or so per month. Now, that is without looking at the expenses, but the fact that it can, in its very small way, return something like $40,000 in revenue every month, income, then it means that if the private sector get involved in it and engage farmers, we can get a model that can make people financially independent. And I'm for making people financially independent, Mr. Speaker. They do, Mr. Speaker. They make, they take the local plantain and sweet potato and make potato chips and plantain chips. And they sold to date 9,849 bags. That's just that one unit. This, of course, is equal to 52,000 pounds of fresh plantain and sweet potato. In addition, 10,791 bottles of local drinks. They make all kinds of local drinks at that place. Of course, drinks that can be found over in Marriott Hotel. Marriott purchased 400 bottles of jam in the first 3 quarters of 2017. They make jams, they make all kinds of things. And so again, I want to encourage young people to look at this as a model. Because quite frankly, as the Minister of Agriculture, I really would like to get out of that. Because I'm a private sector driven person. I don't believe in government doing everything. We do it so that we have done it, at least so far, started by the previous administration and continuing it, to show that it can be done. But it is now time for the private sector to get engaged and turn it into a model so that the burden, if I should use that word, so that it can be taken out of the hands of the government. Privatize it. Let people, the private sector, reign and make that a productive sector so that we don't have to depend on government. It is easy for people to want to work in government and because maybe they feel that the job is secure and the security of tenants and so on. But listen, private sector is also an opportunity for them to make themselves financially independent using the private sector model. Now, Mr. Speaker, in that, I think I mentioned before Ms. Arabella Nisbet. There are other persons who are involved in this agro-processing. For instance, we have people like Teresa Connor, Denise Gillard, Sheila Harris, Louise Brody. And I want to thank them for their efforts and to encourage them to do more to grow their business. We certainly have persons involved in other agro-processing work like Terrell Nisbet, who do drinks and chips, Catherine Pemberton, who do jams, cassava bread, sugar cakes, and while we're on cassava bread, I'll come back to that. Anastasia Elliott, who does wines, jams, jellies, and soap. She makes soap. Maybe some people in St. Kitts don't even know, Mr. Speaker, that we make all those here, you know. Let me just go back to this again for you quickly. Drinks, chips, wines, jams, jellies, soap. I mean, those are things we make right here in St. Kitts and Nevis. The question is, how do you turn it into commercially produced products so that persons can become financially independent because of their efforts? That's what we have to encourage, and encourage the private sector to get engaged in it. Now, Mr. Speaker, let's go to marine resources, because therein, I will say we have had a successful 2017. The Marine Department of Marine Resources has undertaken a number of significant initiatives. But before we touch on those initiatives, let me look at some of the highlights and permit me to draw your attention to the fish landings in the first 3 quarters. Fish landings from reef fishery in 2017 amounted to 286,490 pounds, valued at some $3.5 million. This, of course, represents a 75% increase in the landings compared to the previous year, when we had 163,730 tons, valued at $1.9 million. For coastal pelagic, however, the landings decreased from 88,000 pounds to 48,000 pounds. This was a 46% decrease. Notwithstanding that decrease, Mr. Speaker, fish caught by FAD and ocean pelagic fishery increased from 47,760 pounds to £159,510, increasing the value from $550,120 to $1.7 million. Of course, that represents a 234% increase. And Conch, Mr. Speaker, landing in 2017 amounted to £74,100, and it represents, of course, a 19% increase from the previous year. For the year 2017, there has been significant increase in landings recorded in each landing site. £362,262 in 2016. That's what landed in 2016 on total across all across all areas. And of course, this year we are at £568,310, which is showing a 57% increase over the same period last year. Mr. Speaker, I will skip forward. And let me point out that one of the areas that we want to get engaged in 2018 is in aquaculture. We have already identified land, and we are partnering with one of our friendly countries to work at developing our aquaculture base in St. Kitts. Now, we also have at least 2 significant proposals. They may come to naught, I don't know, but there are persons showing an interest in sea-based aquaculture, and the concept on the Caribbean side is to produce not only for local consumption, but for export. And if we are successful, it means that we will have a significant increase in the production of fish in at least 2019 and beyond, if those 2 important projects, those 2 important investors live up to their word. In the department itself, what we have done also is to introduce in the country the lionfish fishery, and we've also introduced and developed what we call the diamondback squid. In fact, when we had an agricultural open day, persons who went to agricultural open day should have been able to sample the diamondback squid that was prepared by the Department of Agriculture. Mr. Speaker, let me skip forward very quickly. Another initiative of the Department of Marine Resources is the climate change adaptation in the Eastern Caribbean fisheries sector, CC4 Fish. This project has made significant strides in creating awareness of climate change in the fisheries sector. On May 30th, 2017, the project held a workshop for key stakeholders that included key governing agencies, NGOs, and fisherfolk. The purpose of the workshop was to launch the project CC4 Fish and review the work plans for the project's first year to ensure that there is complete understanding of the project's outcomes, of the objectives and the activities. From June 2017 to July 2017, surveys and interviews were conducted with various stakeholders affected by the accumulation of sargassum seaweed. A management plan was drafted, and a meeting was held at the end of July to review the document with key stakeholders. And the department engaged, of course, towards a Caribbean Blue Revolution, which is a project which was funded by FAO. It commenced in May 2017, and the project again aims to contribute to more efficient and inclusive food and agricultural systems. So while we have been focusing a lot on the local fishermen, we have been working with regional and international organizations to develop methods of strengthening and improving on the fisheries, the conduct of fishermen in the country, so that we can produce more fish. Again in June, with the assistance of the Caribbean Large Marine Ecosystem Climb, the department reinstated CMOS, a CMOS program, so that we can support the fishermen when sometimes the catch is a bit low. We can provide some support for these fishermen. The department was really busy during last year, during this year too. Importantly, they developed basic fisher training course in August in 2017 and provided training for some 275 fishermen from both St. Kitts and Nevis. And one of the things that was done, Mr. Speaker, and you will see it in operation in 2018, is the introduction of the VMS system to be able to monitor the movement. Let me don't put it that way. To be able to help the fishermen to identify to those ashore where they are located on sea, so that in the event of any accident or incident, they can be easily found. One of the challenges we had last year was that boat off Deep Bay, if you remember, Mr. Speaker, that got caught up in Sagassam seaweed, and one of its engines had stalled, and the other was perhaps just punting slowly. And the fishermen tried to get to the Sagassam seaweed to clear that engine, and what happened was, at the same time that was taking place, a huge chuff we call it, came and knocked the two fishermen overboard. But because one of those small engines was still punting, the boat started to drift away from the fishermen, and they were trying desperately to catch the boat and didn't catch it. And ultimately they had to make up their mind to turn back to shore. And when they did, one of them drowned. So the VMS system introduced, and the equipment on board of each of these vessels will help persons on shore to be able to identify where fishermen are. It does two things. It does another thing too. Of course, it tells you where people are catching their fish, because you can track them and see where they are. It tells you whether people out there really fishing or doing something else, you know. But the idea is that we want to provide safe. We want to make sure that our fishermen are safe when they're out there, and so this VMS system will help us to be able to help them to be safe while they're out there. Now, Mr. Speaker, we have the Department of Cooperatives, and Mr. Speaker, what's my time?
Due to complete at 11:43. It's 11:35 now.
Let me quickly then come to cooperatives then, Mr. Speaker.
The Department of Cooperatives.
But you have an additional 30 minutes.
Yes, I am aware, because I have to come to things like housing and other things.
Yeah.
But for the time being, Mr. Speaker,
You're going to do it.
with the support of the local cooperative movement and allied agencies, the Department of Cooperatives continue its efforts to build the local cooperative movement. The Eastern Caribbean Central Bank considers cooperatives to be an important pillar of economic development of our people, and it challenges us to pay closer attention to the cooperative sector. This brings greater awareness to the relevance of cooperatives, and the department, of course, convened its first ever cooperative week that was held from June 1st of this year. June 1st this year, the first time they had a Cooperatives Week. And the theme was, Cooperatives Ensure No One is Left Behind. A week of activities, of course, surrounded the International Cooperatives Day. It was celebrated for the first time in 2017. The activities included a church service, of course, an award ceremony, a special radio program, cooperative fair, and so on and so on. Awardees who were awarded that by the Cooperative Department, awardees walked down a red carpet to receive the award. Awardees included individuals like Bernice Rollins
and Antonio Williams, past registrars of the Department of Cooperatives. Long-standing teacher guides in the junior savings cooperatives in schools were also awarded. This included educators like Annie Marsham, Cicely Liebert, and Shirley Wyatt. The Department of Cooperatives recognized them for their contribution to the overall cooperative movement. Another highlight, of course, of Cooperative Week was the Cooperative Fair, which was convened at Independence Square, and 10 booth stalls were there, and we are grateful and thankful for the support of the public, for the work of the cooperatives was on display. Mr. Speaker, while I have quite a lot more to talk about cooperatives, I'm mindful that I'm only probably halfway through my presentation, and so I want to move forward just a step quickly. There was a quiz organized in St. Kitts and Nevis, the National Cooperative League, in the amount of $10,000 was called the St. Kitts Nevis Cooperative League Department and Cooperatives Primary School Quiz. 13 primary schools participated in the quiz. Schools were placed in 3 different zones for the preliminary rounds of the quiz. The top 2 schools from each zone competed for the finals, with Joshua Obadiah Williams Primary School emerging as champions. And so I want to congratulate the Joshua Obadiah Primary School.
Very good, very good.
That's all by you, no?
Yeah.
I didn't even realize that. The second place school, of course, was Beach Allen Primary, followed by Keon in 3rd place. So apart from trophies, monetary awards were donated to the schools. $1,000, $750, and $500 respectively were presented to the winning school, because we want to engender in the young people the concept of cooperative. When people, Dr. Simmons, who was a former prime minister of this federation, used to say, and I took it from him, the contribution of individuals, you get far more when you work together than working alone. And it is true. So it supports the question or the point that cooperatives, especially young people, must begin to work together if you want to achieve more. Because you can continue on the selfish path and you may achieve, but more can be achieved. And especially my whole push for young people to seek financial independence can be achieved if you work together and cooperate. So the cooperative department is there to support you, and the cooperative department can help you to get through to the Jeff program, because Jeff offers, again, I keep repeating this because a lot of people seem not to be aware, that Jeff offers opportunity for persons, especially cooperatives, groups of people, to benefit from the program they have. They have a program to fund up to $50,000 US to help cooperatives to develop their project. In fact, one example is, there's over in Connery, there's one of our CARICOM brothers is doing some farming over there, broilers and everything else, and pigs. And they came up with a concept of building a unit that can use the waste of the farm to create energy, so that now the farm is being supported by waste providing energy, so that now they don't have to depend on electricity. And that got support from Jeff. And so individuals must know that there are opportunities like that, because that certainly will take a huge load off the cost of production once you can provide biogas and be able to produce the energy that you want. Now, again, I say I have quite a bit on cooperative, but I realize my time is coming up, and I want to get to housing and other things. Now, Mr. Speaker, I have to be careful here, because if I don't say something on environment, my Department of Environment might want to know, where was I if I was not in the Parliament to represent them? So the Department of Environment, Mr. Speaker, is in this period of our lives, perhaps one of the most important departments in the government. I say perhaps one of the most important departments because of the impact of climate change. And this department has to focus and pay attention on what's happening worldwide, including on our own shores because of climate change. We have seen what hurricanes have done. We have seen and heard about the degradation of the coastlines where you have habitat near coastlines have to be moved. We have also seen what has happened in our mountains where because of the drought, some of those trees that used to support the monkeys to keep them from coming down in our lowlands have disappeared. Hurricanes have uprooted some of them. So the Department of Environment has to be conscious of this and to pay attention to how we preserve our environment. And so the department is therefore, it remains committed to leading on environmental matters such as climate change, biodiversity, and biosafety. Now, one of the department's mandates include initiating and implementing environmental policies. Environmental policies, also programs and projects in order to achieve sustainable development in St. Christopher and Nevis. And in 2017, there have been various projects and the programs that the Department of Environment has been leading on. These projects are all geared towards environmental management, preservation, and conservation of our natural resources. For example, the ongoing Conserving Biodiversity Project has allowed for St. Kitts and Nevis to fulfill significant aspects of its obligations under the Convention of Biological Diversity. Special areas of mention that have been successfully executed are the active management of protected areas and national parks through the hiring of park rangers and conservation officers.
Remember, your time is expired.
Mr. Speaker, it's your permission. If I can seek another half an hour, that would be. I'll try and make it in that time.
Well, it's not really with my permission. I'll put the question to the House that the honourable member requires an additional 30 minutes. Those in favour? Those against? 30 minutes extra granted, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank my colleagues for their support. I was saying that the active areas and national parks through the hiring of park rangers and conservation officers. This is one of the success stories of the Department of Environment. We have been able, Mr. Speaker, to get some areas dedicated as reserved areas, and we have hired individuals to pay attention to the national park, the hills, and including one in Nevis Peak. We then have persons who are now going there daily, every day, taking care of that environment. In fact, Mr. Speaker, in agriculture, if I might go back there, I've been discussing with my agricultural persons how we can embark on reforestation of the hillsides. Because I believe, Mr. Speaker, that reforestation of the hillsides will help us will attract the monkeys back to the hills then. So we'll have less of them, I hope, in the lowlands where we have our farms, and also in our homes when we go to work and they're all in our yard doing all kinds of things. And so I am pleased that the Department of Environment is paying attention to the preservation of those areas. They have also embarked successfully revision and update of the NCEMA, Development of Protected Areas Unit Management Framework. They've also embarked on communication strategy and public awareness for the protected areas. In saying that, Mr. Speaker, the St. Kitts and Nevis is particularly vulnerable to the adverse impacts of climate change. We all know that. Sectors such as tourism, agriculture, water, health have already been impacted in one way or the other. In response to the current and projected impacts, the Department of Environment has been undertaking various initiatives that could reduce our risks and the risks of our natural assets from climate change. To address the issue, the department, with technical support from the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center, has conducted training in the public and private sectors. The Caribbean Climate Change Online Risk and Adaptation Tool was engaged in that training. The tool that was used helps decision makers to see all kinds of activities through a climate or climate change lens, and to identify actions and minimize climate-related loss, as well as take advantage of opportunities. For the low-lying coastal community like St. Kitts and Nevis, it is critically important that the necessary measures and actions are put in place to protect our beaches and coastline. Coastal and marine pollution from indiscriminate disposal of refuse continue to pose a tremendous challenge to the Department of Environment. In an effort to bring awareness to the impacts of the debris on our shores, we have had sessions, we have gone out, we have done cleaning, and we have also helped to train persons in the value of keeping that environment clean. Now, Mr. Speaker, there was a cleanup organized, and you would be surprised, I hope you're not surprised, that approximately 5,600 items weighing about 1,160 pounds were collected from over in Frigate Bay, Keys, and Connery beaches. And these were items that had no place and no reason to be on our beaches. I want to encourage our people at this point to understand the danger of going on our beaches and having parties and leaving the debris strewn all over our beaches. That kind of debris can get into our water and do damage to the reefs. And it is important, therefore, when you go to the beaches, that you, in the same way you enjoy the scenery and the party, please let other people, help other people to enjoy your environment by cleaning up all of the debris that you have taken onto the beach. The government, Mr. Speaker, has positioned itself to lead on environmental issues like climate change, as I said earlier, and in late 2015, St. Kitts and Nevis produced its national determined contributions under the head of the Department of Environment. In July 2017, St. Kitts and Nevis received grant funding from the government of Italy to engage in a pilot project which will begin the transformation and the transportation sector, including electronic school buses. Mr. Minister of Education, you're aware of that?
Yes, sir. It's in the capital project.
It's in the capital project. So that we are pleased that sometime in 2018 we should be able to see electronic school buses. This project will begin the transitional shift from the use of fossil fuels to the use of renewable energy in the transportation sector, by allowing us to benefit from feasibility studies and the procurement and installation of at least 2 solar-powered battery charging stations and at least 3 electric school buses. These buses will replace aging and inoperable diesel and gasoline buses that we have in our current fleet. The Department of Environment continues to undertake various adaptation and mitigation action to ensure that St. Kitts and Nevis builds its resilience to reduce the impact of climate change. It is currently implementing a climate change adaptation project that has allowed various departments to receive training in climate change impacts aimed at assisting in the generation of scientific information. The Department of Environment recognizes that for climate change impacts to be sustainably addressed within the region, access to reliable data is important. Now, I want to skip forward again here quickly. Although many of the most developed and wealthy nations have given a commitment to individually and collectively reduce their carbon emissions, the Department of Environment is committed to lead on executing national mechanisms that would assist us effectively manage our response to climate change. It has long been recognized that greenhouse gas emissions from small islands such as St. Kitts and Nevis are negligible in relation to the global emissions, but that the threat of climate change and sea level rise to small islands such as St. Kitts and Nevis are very real. Using climate change initiatives as a driver to undertake various activities can catalyze progress in achieving the country's sustainable development goals. Furthermore, the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety, finalized drafts of the National Biosafety Policy, the Administrative System on Biosafety and Biotechnology, and the Biosafety Act 2012 was done. Additionally, the department welcomed the full appointment of a biosafety officer. In support of national implementation of the CBP, the Department of Environment, through the JEF program, regionally facilitated biosafety and biotechnology capacity building for technical personnel throughout the country. The Department of Environment continues to work in close collaboration with non-governmental organizations. Now, Mr. Speaker, it was only last month that the Cabinet approved the climate change policy that was prepared by the Department of Environment, so that we are now a member, having approved this climate change policy. We're now fully in line with the global initiative of countries adopting the climate change policies that help to reduce emissions around the world. Now, Mr. Speaker, before I go to human settlement, I will say briefly that one of the initiatives of the government, as outlined in our manifesto, is providing universal health insurance. It is under that head. But as we develop the concept, we may very well have a different terminology for what will come out of the consultation. During 2017, we engaged the University of the West Indies Health Economics Unit, and they were kind enough to accept our invitation, and they produced a proposal for the commencement and implementation of a program that will result in the delivery of universal health care. That program, of course, Mr. Speaker, was outlined in a document which they sent to us, which the Cabinet has approved, agreed upon. And as we speak, I am aware that the contract between the government and the unit of the University of the West Indies is complete, is finalized, having been through the chambers of the Attorney General as well. We believe that come January 2018, the program can commence, in that the university will have its persons on the ground and will be in consultation with various stakeholders. And I look forward, and I am hoping and I'm encouraging the opposition not to be just opposition, but to be engaged as well, because I really would like the opposition's view. Seeing, Mr. Speaker, that the opposition themselves had the same concept of universal health care, I would expect their full support, working with the University of the West Indies, for us to get to the point where we can say to our citizens, this is what we are going to deliver to you, this is what you say you want, this is when we are going to implement it. And so during 2018, there will be work on the ground. I will expect persons to be invited to submit papers on the issue. I would expect everybody in healthcare to have a say. I would expect persons in the social security to be engaged. I would expect the entire country, from going around the country, having town hall meetings and so on, will be engaged. In fact, very early in the game, I had suggested to the university that I would want to see us commence with a national forum, bringing all of the stakeholders together from the start, because we do not want anyone to be left behind. We do not want anyone to say we were not consulted. We do not want anyone to feel we did not contribute to what this nation is doing. We are an inclusive government, and we are going to be inclusive in the approach. I trust, Mr. Speaker, it is my hope, that when we come to independence 2018, we should be in a position to announce to the country that this is the path we will follow to provide coverage for those persons who are less fortunate than most of us. Because you know the story, Mr. Speaker. You know the stories. You've seen them. Minister Phipps is faced with that almost every day, of people who come to the ministry and want help. Thank goodness we have some good social partners in the country, like Mickey Weintraub and the James family, and others like that, who go out of their way to help persons who have need. I have known my good friend Mickey has been able to get someone who had cancer to be able to go all the way to India to be able to get treatment that hitherto could not be obtained here. Or if it could, the cost was so prohibitive that they could not make it. We want to be in a position as a government, as a country, we want to be in a position to be able to help, to provide support for a person like that. It should not be that everyone is entitled to education. It should not be that those who have it can afford to pay for their health, but some who are not in that position suffer because they can't find the resources. So we are going to make sure that we bring that to the country. And yes, we have to consider cost, because it's going to cost. But the benefits to be provided to persons in the country should be far more of importance to the people in the country than the little cost or whatever it is that we might ask to contribute to it, if we have to be asked to contribute to it. So don't rule it out. If you have to pay something towards universal health, so that when one is sick, one can access the services that they need wherever it is around the world, what's wrong with that? I don't want to hear anybody coming here and telling me if we have to pay a little bit, as somebody say, government put on a tax, because it's the benefits. What do we provide? Do we wait until a guy pine away and die painfully? Or do we say, how can we help? And if it has a little cost, so what? So what? I am prepared, Mr. Speaker, to encourage everyone that if this benefit for all has a cost, let us do our little bit to contribute to make sure that it happens. And don't look at it as if government put on any tax. It's either we want the benefits or we don't want it. And so, Mr. Speaker, that's why I'm encouraging my colleagues on the other side to give it the full support. When the time comes, we put our hands and our feet and our heads and everything together and deliver. Some of you, all of us perhaps in this country, know someone, some family who suffered, who needed a little help, who was going around with paper begging contributions. All of us know somebody. And if you don't know somebody, one day it will come to your family. And when it comes to your family and you feel it, you will say, boy, I'm glad I have this universal health coverage. Because it's going to come to some family or some friend. Nothing is more painful than when someone goes to the Ministry of Social Services and the amount they want is 20,000 US. Because they don't have it. And there's a ceiling of 5,000 US. Another 7, another 13, another 15 is needed. We have to make a decision in government. Can we do it? Maybe the budget is blown out of proportion too. Well, listen, I say, and I hope the majority of people in St. Kitts and Nevis, that the time has come. The time has come for health to be considered an important and fundamental, almost fundamental right. The time has come. So we'll work towards that. My colleague on my right tells me I have another 10 minutes, so let me come to this human settlement. I'm not going to speak about the whole of human settlement today. I can tell you that as we speak, there's a policy, a project that has been created, a human settlement policy. I won't go into that. The lady was here. I think she's completed. The Department of Sustainable Development is engaged in that as well. But I will say that the government's approach to the housing aspect of human settlement. I say the housing aspect because human settlement is a very broad subject. But the housing aspect is, one, private sector persons can come forward and be engaged in the construction of houses for persons who are in need. To that end, I have spoken with TDC. To that end, I've spoken with Contec. To that end, I've spoken with other stakeholders. The idea is, like Hobson, the idea is, if it's an area that you can benefit, but it is not so much about, while for you it is about benefit, it's also about providing security for persons who are needing houses. So therefore, I encourage you, and you don't have to have the land, government will find areas for you. Government will assist you in finding areas where you can develop projects so that you can make homes available while on a business level, make homes available to persons who need it. In other words, the people who are talking NHC, don't ever believe that NHC could build a house for everybody. It ain't gonna happen. It's not going to happen. That's not a bottomless pit. NHC's focus, according to the Act, is on those poor people and indigent people. And while we may have stretched it a bit over many years, because after all, times have changed, and without amending the Act, you go to a different level. We cannot at NHC, my ministry cannot support NHC to build a house for everybody. But we have assisted persons by directing them to financial institutions, giving them support to financial institutions, and thankfully to institutions like National Bank, they have given support. They have given support to persons who we have recommended, and those persons have been able to get their homes. The government, however, does some things through NHC, and I will come to that because of something my colleague just told me. I will go to that point first. The government continues to offer to first-time homeowners, like they did in the period when Minister Carty got his house free. The government continues to provide that facility, that duty-free concessions to first-time homeowners in the country.
Labor vision.
So the government is encouraging persons to take advantage of it. All the government is saying is, when we provide you with that opportunity, don't go rent out your house to the chief of police.
Rent your house to who you want.
Don't go into the house to the chief of police and get the government pay for you.
It will be theirs to rent.
Like ministers of government have done in the corrupt way. And that is why I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, that opportunity is there. But then, Mr. Speaker, NHC has done some construction. We have been fortunate in that we did obtain a loan from Social Security of $50 million. And the plan is to build a minimum of 300 low-income homes. I want to say that we are in the age where sometimes the family is large enough, too large for two-bedroom low-income homes. In some cases, we may do 3. But the primary focus is on two-bedroom homes. Those two-bedroom homes which we have built in this period under the team unity government is superior to what has been done before. You hear what I say, Mr. Speaker? Superior.
What are the metrics for superiority you're using?
Because he says so.
Because he says so, yeah.
You know, Mr. Speaker,
What are the metrics?
they are superior in many ways.
Tell us.
Mr. Speaker, The previous administration had not built anything past 800 square feet per house. The latest figures before we came to office was 780 square feet. We have gone and we have done 862 square feet. Mr. Speaker, the honorable members on the opposition benches want to know how superior they are. But I'm not saying it to satisfy what they're asking, but for the public out there to understand that we have engaged local contractors and that we are producing a superior house. Now look here. Yes, you hear about guava berry and strawberry and all them kind of berry, but we have designed what we call unity housing solutions. Now, for instance, NHC increased the size of the homes from 749 square feet, that's the last size that they had under the previous administration, to 862 square feet. That is superior. That is superior. Mr. Speaker, the bedrooms have gone to 144 square feet. You could now put not only a bed, but a dressing table in it. You could put more than one bed in it, for that matter. Then, of course, the bathroom is bigger. And you know something, Mr. Speaker? You must go to Cunningham Heights and look at the project. When you stand up and look, just the very look at them looks superior. Just the look looks superior. And you know what's more, Mr. Speaker? The roof, what gives so much trouble in hurricane with shingles, is no more. We now have galvalume. So poor people, Mr. Speaker, getting galvalume roof. A harder roof. Not that it won't get damaged in a hurricane, but it is less likely to get damaged in a hurricane. So whereas the shingles will blow up easily, these roofs have a little bit more resistant to the hurricane. And so, Mr. Speaker, we have already reached well over 100 houses already in this year alone. And the other 200 plus that we intend to do will be done in 2018 and into 2019. I want to assure those persons who have had land under the previous administration with no hope of getting anything built on them that we are doing some of those as well. So it's not about a project where we build 15 in one spot alone. People who already own land in certain areas, own the land, we have accommodated them once you're in that category. Our focus tends to be persons below $3,000 income. But we have also gone beyond that because the government has indicated the one thing that we will do which is much better, more superior. Interest rate is as low as 2%, 3% and 5%. That is one thing that has happened under this administration that has never happened before. Interest rate 2%, 3% and 5%. The Unity Housing Program continues to be the envy of persons. When we had the ministerial meetings here, individuals of City House, no, my goodness, I wish we could get the model to take to my own country. Mr. Speaker, we had a launching of 15 of them in the Spooners area, and I will tell you, it was a great launch. And I don't know why people, Mr. Speaker, go on radio and say all kind of foolishness, who can't get key and all kind of things. In fact, I remember for number 2 was on radio the other day, I think at a press conference. This 1 minute have to do with house. Telling the press they must ask the ministers questions. She's sitting in Parliament every day,
Is every day going to Parliament? Oh my.
Every day when you have Parliament, she here. Or sometimes she ain't here, but every day when you have Parliament, she here. She has not learned the lesson I've taught her. I have taught her, Mr. Speaker, to ask questions in Parliament. Ask questions in Parliament. Don't go to the press and tell the press, ask the minister no question. You're here, ask questions. But I suppose that she hasn't learned that lesson yet. I don't know when she's going to learn that lesson. So, Mr. Speaker, maybe I'm not a good teacher. I taught for 5 years and it's a long time ago. I know you taught us well, so it's a long time ago as well.
Lawyers supposed to know how to ask questions, so maybe she a good lawyer.
Thank you, my humble
You
friend.
better want them to love them.
Okay.
You know, I always feel good when you refer to me that way. It means that you.
One time almost.
It means that you are happy. You're happy that I acquit myself well.
You did.
Mr. Speaker, I wanted to go to some other areas, but I realized that my time is about at the end. And so what I will say is this. What I will say in closing is this. That the Ministry of Agriculture, Universal Health Insurance, Marine Resources, Corporate Environment and Human Settlement is on the right path. Is on the right path. We will work diligently to improve upon any weak areas we have, because we're not so naive to don't think that we don't have weaknesses, because yes, we do. We are not perfect, and we welcome all the criticisms. I prefer them in Parliament rather than on the radio, on Freedom Radio, because that way you don't get any answers. If you ask them here, you get answers.
Remember?
And that's a good, and I will wrap up, Mr. Speaker. And as a good book of Galatians 6:9 says, so rightly, let us not become very weary in doing well, for at the proper time we will reap the harvest if we do not give it up. May it please you, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah.